I was super excited to upgrade to the Plunge Air as a replacement for my first generation plunge. But now that I've set it up, my excitement has faded for a few reasons. So stick around to find out why this isn't quite the game changer I was hoping for. Alright, so let's dive into the Plunge Air with the Evolve Standard Chiller. That's the one I got, because the Plunge Air is available with two different chillers, and we'll talk about that. When I first got the Air, I was super excited because I was upgrading from the first generation Plunge, you know, the white acrylic tub that looked really slick, but had a couple of like minor inconveniences that I was really looking forward to mitigate and address with upgrading. And on paper, it looked like a huge step up. The Plunge Air measures 61 inches long, 34 inches wide, and 28 inches deep. That means it requires less floor space, but has the same amount of volume on the inside. And especially the depth really helps to allow my body to fully submerge myself without anything sticking out. You know, that's a real plus, and it requires less floor space, which is also a plus because we have so many plunges and saunas as part of our review and all we do here, that it's nice to use only the minimum floor space necessary. Now the Plunge Air holds about 105 gallons of water, so it's a great size for submerging your body. Even if you're on the taller side, like I'm 6 feet tall and I can stretch out without needing to bend my knees, which is awesome. With the old plunge, either my toes or my feet really, or my knees would stick out, and my buddy Brian, you know, half of his chest would stick out. He's like 6'4", 6'5", or something like that. The old tub was significantly too small for him to get a fully immersive kind of experience. For context, when using other inflatable tubs like the TheraFrost or the Energize, both of which I've reviewed on this channel as well, sitting upright was the only option. And that could get uncomfortable during longer plunges, but even during, you know, a short 2-minute session or so, it felt kind of, you were tenser, or I was tenser than I necessarily needed to be. And with the Plunge Air, on the other hand, you get an angled backrest. And that allows you to lean back, which makes a big difference in comfort during longer plunges, but you can immediately feel it when you slide into the tub. You immediately assume a quite natural position that facilitates relaxation. And that's important because especially if you're new to cold plunging, getting in is likely gonna make you tense up and freak out a little bit. And so the more relaxed you can be, the better it is, because then you can focus on breathing and just really, you know, giving in and enjoying the ride. And that's really one of the cool things about the Plunge Air, is that angled backrest. I really love that. Another feature that I appreciate is the foam mat that comes with the tub. It's like a little ground cover that goes underneath the tub. And it's a nice touch because it helps protect the bottom of the plunge, especially when you're setting it up outdoors on rough surfaces like gravel or uneven terrain. Now, once the tub is filled with water, it gets pretty heavy, and so the mat ensures nothing sharp or uneven damages the base. Now, I always make it a point when I set up inflatables to sweep the area, make sure that nothing is in the way. But, you know, there is only so much I can do, and there is a chance that I might miss something, and then, you know, it could potentially puncture the bottom or the side, you know, where a lot of the weight resides. So I really like that. It's a nice little touch. Now, despite all the positives, there are a few things that I ran into that dampened my excitement. So let's start with the Evolve Standard Chiller. Now here's the thing, you can get the Plunge Air with two different chillers, the Standard Chiller, which is a little bit less expensive, and the Pro Chiller. Now when I reached out to Plunge, they sent me the Standard Chiller, which I thought is a little bit of a bummer because I kind of knew what I had to expect, and that's exactly what happened. You know, the thing is with the Standard Chiller, it's quite noisy. You know, much louder than I expected, and definitely louder than the one that came with my first generation plunge. It was an older chiller, but based on what I remember, it was not nearly as noisy as the new Standard Chiller. Now, so if you're using, you know, the chiller or the plunge in an outdoor space like I am, the constant, you know, hum can be a bit of a distraction. You know, picture yourself trying to enjoy a peaceful evening outside, but all you can hear is the chiller running in the background. That's not ideal, right? The app that the chiller comes with, you know, it's Wi-Fi enabled. It's nice and easy to use, but here's a catch. You can't schedule when to turn the chiller on and off. And that would have been super useful, especially with the noise issue. You know, it means you have to manually turn it off at night or whenever you don't want it running, which can be a bit of a hassle, you know. I would have loved to simply set a schedule that says turn the chiller off automatically every day at 5 p.m. because nobody's plunging in our house after 5 on most days. And even if it turns off at 5 and when I plunge at 6, the water is still cold, so it's not a problem at all. But that means if we go out and have dinner, it's quiet. Now I have to walk up to the chiller and turn it off. It's not a big deal, but it's something that could be automated, so I don't have to do it every day. Plus, I would love to just turn it off at night, to conserve. We are running on batteries overnight here at the Kummer house because we use solar panels during the day. And so turning off, the chiller at night and then kicking it back on in the morning would have been my preference. Unfortunately, the app doesn't allow. Another thing that disappointed me with the standard chiller is the lack of ozone sanitation, which means you'll need to rely on chemicals to keep the water clean. And I'm not a big fan of adding chemicals to the water. So if you're like me, I'd recommend upgrading to the Pro Chiller, which includes an ozone generator that can sanitize the water, keep it clean for much longer, even with limited or no use of chemicals. And it's also 30% quieter than the standard chiller. And so you really, kill two birds with a stone by upgrading to the Pro Chiller. Now let's talk about the setup process. One thing that frustrated me was the plumbing. The hoses and the connections between the tub and the chiller unit, because it limits how you can position the tub and the chiller. If you've got a large space to work with, that might not be a big deal. But in my setup where space was limited, it became a challenge. I couldn't position everything exactly how I wanted because the way the plumbing connects the chiller to the tub. In other words, the plumbing consists of PVC, a combination of PVC and flexi pipes with built-in elbows, and they only go in a certain way that dictates the position of the chiller as it relates to the tub, meaning that the chiller can only be positioned at the foot end of the tub and nowhere else. But the way I wanted to position the tub to look, if I'm in the plunge, to look out on the backyard, it didn't work space-wise, and that was really frustrating. I would have preferred just flexible piping that I could, turn and twist a little bit to make it work exactly how I want it. I would have also preferred if the fittings were color-coded or labeled more clearly, because there are only two connections really, on the tub as well as on the chiller, the water inlet and the water outlet. Fairly straightforward, but knowing which one is the inlet and the outlet, if that was color-coded, I wouldn't have to scan the QR code and download the instructions to figure out, how to connect everything. It would have sped up the setup process significantly. And, TheraFrost, for example, that's why I'm bringing the color coding up. They have green and red. One is the inlet, one is the outlet. Fairly straightforward. You don't need to read any instructions. You just connect green to green and red to red. You're ready to go. So I think that would have been more intuitive and something that the plunge could potentially improve. Now, the performance of the cold tub, the Plunge Air, really hinges on the type of chiller you choose. Now, I mentioned before, you can get the Plunge Air with the Evolve standard chiller, which comes with, it's like the base model. It has a 1.5 horsepower motor and is capable of cooling the water down to 39 degrees Fahrenheit or about 3-4 degrees Celsius. It features a sediment and a 20 micron pleated filter, which does a good job of removing lint and debris from the water, and that's likely enough to keep your plunge clean, from a maintenance perspective, but it doesn't have any advanced water purification features like ozone. So if you're plunging regularly, if you want to avoid chemicals, if you have, multiple people maybe using the plunge, you're going to end up either adding a lot of chemicals or changing the water much more frequently than I care for. The Pro Chiller, on the other hand, can cool the water down to 37 degrees Fahrenheit, so a little colder, and it comes equipped with ozone sanitation, which helps a lot to keep the water clean without relying so much on chemicals. Now, in terms of temperature, the difference between 37 and 39 degrees isn't something you'll likely feel, and I don't think there is a significant difference in the health benefits between the two as far as, your cold water immersion experience goes. Both are cold enough to trigger all of the positive effects of cold exposure, such as improved circulation, muscle recovery, mental clarity, etc. However, I would argue that the warmer the water, the longer you have to stay in, especially if you're already used to cold water immersion. So the more proficient you become, the more you adapt to the cold water, likely the longer you have to stay in to get, the same benefits at higher temperatures than, too low. Now, the other thing that I should point out is between the two chillers, the Pro Chiller is 30% less noisy. And I think that's a big deal for many people. For me, it is. I would have loved to have the Pro Chiller instead of the standard one, if not for no other reason than the noise, So my take on it is, if you can afford, if you have the extra budget, go for the Pro Chiller. You get a little bit colder water, you get better sanitation, and you get less noise. Speaking about pricing, depending on what chiller you go with, the Plunge Air starts at around $3,500. You know, that's the Plunge Air with the Evolve standard chiller. That's the unit or the setup that I have. And that's a pretty reasonable price compared to the other options on the market. You know, if you have the budget, if you are a serious plunger, if you want to have the quietest chiller possible between those two, I'd, you know, spend $1,500 more and get the Pro Chiller. You know, quieter, better sanitation, colder water, more horsepower. You know, it's just overall the more robust solution. I think, yes, it's $1,500 more, but that's you know, pushes the total unit price to about $5,000, and that's still in line with a TheraFrost or some of the other higher end inflatables that I've tested before. So you don't necessarily spend more, but you get a very good chiller. I would argue the Pro Chiller is likely even better than the one from TheraFrost and some of the others that are, you know, come from China. I know that I was told that Plunge, you know, designed their chillers in-house. So I think you get the better chiller with the Pro Chiller in comparison to some of the other plunges on the market, while still paying roughly the same price. And I have a discount code for you. If you use code MK at checkout, you get $150 off. That lowers the price of the base unit, meaning the Plunge Air with the standard chiller, to $3,350, and it also lowers the price of the Plunge Air with the Pro Chiller to $4,850. So that makes it a little bit more palatable, and you know, you get the better chiller. Now, if you're not sure if, you know, the Plunge Air is even the right choice for you or what chiller to get, I recommend you check out my comparison of all of the different plunges and chillers that the Plunge company has to offer on michaelkummer.com. I'm going to link it down below, so check that out. It breaks down, you know, the pros and cons of each of those models, and also goes into more detail, you know, on the chiller. So check that out. So who is the Plunge Air for then? Now, if you're someone looking for an entry-level cold plunge tub that offers comfort, decent size, and solid performance, then the Plunge Air is a great option. You know, it's particularly well suited, I think, for taller users who want to fully submerge without feeling cramped, and the angled backrest makes it much more comfortable than some other inflatables that force you to sit upright. I think it's also a good choice if you're someone who doesn't need extreme cold temperatures all the time, like my wife, for instance, prefers to have water around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and the Plunge Air works perfectly for her. You know, she isn't concerned about the lack of an ozone generator because she doesn't use the plunge as frequently as I do. Plus, I'm the one maintaining the water with chemicals anyway, so, you know, she doesn't have to worry about it. However, if you're like me and you're used to higher end tubs with quieter chillers, stronger water circulation, and built-in ozone generators, the Plunge Air might feel a little bit of a step down. So if you're looking for something with better overall performance, I'd recommend looking at the Pro Chiller version for sure, or even other models like the Morosco Forge or the Sun Home Saunas Cold Plunge Pro. That's the one that I'm currently using. So the bottom line here is the Plunge Air is a solid product, and for the price it offers a lot of value. But after using higher end ice baths, I become more critical of some of its features. You know, it's comfortable, functional, and reasonably priced, but the chiller noise, the lack of an ozone generator in the standard chiller, and the limitations with setup have definitely tempered my initial excitement. That being said, it's not going to be my go-to plunge. That spot still goes to the Sun Home Saunas Cold Plunge Pro, but the Plunge Air works perfectly for my wife, who enjoys a warmer plunge experience and doesn't really care too much about water maintenance because that's my job. If you're thinking about getting a plunge tub, take everything I've mentioned into account. The Plunge Air is a great option for many people, but I'd recommend going for the Pro Chiller for a more complete experience. And don't forget to check out my full comparison of plunge models and my written review on michaelkummer.com to help you decide which one is right for you. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you found this review helpful, hit the like button. Let me know in the comments what plunge setup you're using or considering. And if there is something you didn't like about the video, let me know for sure so I can improve. Until next time.